My name's Bassam Mahfouz. I'm the London Assembly member for Ealing and Hillingdon, and I've been on the Assembly now for just under a year. Prior to that, and coming up to now being 20 years as a councillor in Ealing. During that time, most of that time, I've been a cabinet member for various different portfolios. So that's covered everything from the environment and transport, but I've also been the finance lead, business lead, so supporting enterprises and so on. And then more recently in terms of housing. And in terms of my day job, I was running a housing association community investment department, so supporting entrepreneurs, looking after community facilities. So I've been effectively a bit of a landlord from that point of view, as well as looking to make sure that, sort of working with the community in terms of taking on facilities. But more recently, the last job I was doing before I took on obviously got elected by the good people of Ealing and Hillingdon, was that I was the Chief Executive for Refugee Action Kingston. So if I tell you a little bit about what difference it made to the charity and what we were able to achieve by working with Shailesh. So before I came along, my predecessor had actually, connected with Shailesh, and actually, we'd gone back a little while ourselves with my councillor hat on in terms of responsibility for the environment and reducing waste. And obviously, a lot of work that Shailesh does is in terms of very, helpful from an environmental point of view. But my predecessor had secured a central downtown, centre of town location in Kingston. Probably only time in its history Kingston upon Thames will be called as downtown. But great location, right in the middle of the town centre, and took a fifth floor space in this building that was earmarked for redevelopment to be knocked down. Now, of course, I don't need to tell you where the development sector and the construction sector has been for the last few years. So I think we're going to probably be in there for a good period of time before anything happens to that building. But being in that building meant a huge difference. So when I went in there, the first thing I always do is look at the finances. How much are we spending on X, Y, and Z? And clearly, one of the first things I wanted to do was look at how much we're spending on overheads, because when you go for fundraising bids and you spend a hell of a lot of time looking at fundraising opportunities, is that a lot of people will fund you for staff, for frontline staff who are going to make the difference on the ground, but they won't necessarily pay you for the overhead costs, or they will pay you for limited overhead costs. So if you're paying for significant rents, for business rates, for all those sorts of other additional costs, that is not something that you're likely to recoup in a hurry. And we had an office space which we'd been in for sort of over 20 years in that building, and it was sort of excess to requirements really, because actually we had this amazing space on the fifth floor where it just wasn't being used as well as it could do when I came in. So we then maximised the use of that space. We were using it as a classroom to teach ESOL, so English as a second language, to the asylum seekers and refugees that were there in Kingston, making sure that aligned with a job club that ran out of there with advisors that helped them to make sure that they could learn the skills and make sure they convert their CVs and all the rest of it to be able to get into jobs, because it's a massive cliff edge that you face as an asylum seeker. The day that you are granted your status, which you could have been waiting for years, and having been made a scapegoat for all of the government's ills and mismanagement of the economy and all the rest of it, is that it should be a really happy day. And actually, if I told you that previously it used to be 28 days from the moment that you got that letter that you'd have to get yourself a bank account, national insurance number, sort yourself out with a property to move into, and without any references, and all sorts of other sort yourself out with a deposit, all the rest of it. In London's housing crisis, 28 days is absolutely impossible. The government had previously reduced that to 7 days, which was just basically a sentence for many asylum seekers or newly identified refugees to be put out on the streets. The government, thankfully, has now sort of increased that back up to 56 days, so people have at least got a fighting chance. But as a charity, we had lots of things that we had to juggle with to try and deal with on a day-to-day basis. But being able to use that space to try and really support people from day one was incredibly important. Many of the asylum seekers are actually living on £8.50 a week. £8.50 a week. Right? I'm sure anybody here with kids, how many of your kids get less than £8.50 a week in terms of pocket money, right? So that's what they're living on or trying to live off week to week. So what we were able to do with the space that we had was we got lots of donations, but didn't have anywhere to be able to sort of do anything with those donated clothes. And so we were able to make a space where people can come in with dignity, choose some clothes, tops, bottoms, trainers, underwear, for women as well. It's just some of those basic necessities which actually they can't afford on £8.50 a week, and that was transformative for the people that we were able to support. During my time, I was then able to we were able to successfully get another space just across the corridor, and what that meant was we were able to do even more in that space, and it meant that we could make additional savings from having to hire a hall to actually being able to do it in that particular location. We were activating a space that would otherwise have been absolutely dead. We were bringing people into the town centre and making sure that we're really adding value and increasing the number of people that we were able to support as a charity as well. So during my time, we were able to grow the work that we did to support well over 2,500 people locally. So I take that experience into the role that I have now. And so going forward, I guess there's sort of three key things I'm going to be talking about briefly. So one is, the first thing is that obviously Labour promised, won an election last year, a 5-point plan for revitalising our high streets. So the first one of those it was very much around tackling antisocial behaviour and shoplifting, which has obviously soared basically in the last few years. The second was around banking hubs. We've obviously seen lots of key banks across high streets move out, and making sure that we step in and be interventionists around that. The third one, which obviously I'll come to talk about in a bit more, is about replacing business rates. The fourth was about stamping out late payments, and the fifth, which again I'm going to be talking about, is revamping empty shops, pubs and community spaces. So moving on from that, of course, we're seeing retail spaces being a real challenge, as you'll all know, because of the online sector. Buying online, you don't have to pay any business rates, you don't have a space, there's no rateable value, you pay on the profit that you make, etc. So the government has been very clear about being able to trying to protect retail space against the shift to online. And so as part of that consultation, what you might have picked up is that rateable values of £500,000 or less will be seeing a reduction in their business rate liabilities come April next year. And that, of course, as Shailesh just said, clearly there's a £22 billion black hole in the finances overall. This is going to come at a net change. So actually, for those bigger spaces, the rateable value of £500,000 plus, we're likely to see an increase to offset that. But that is going to be something that's going to be introduced at the moment. It looks like April next year. And then the last bit in terms of sort of supporting charitable operations. So as you've already seen from the previous presentation, there's a lot there about closing those loopholes, plenty as there are. There's a real commitment from the government to make sure that we are closing off those loopholes. We talked about that from an income tax point of view, and we're talking about that from a business rate point of view. There's a moral duty there to do the right thing, but there's also obviously a financial imperative for the government to be doing closing those loopholes to make sure that we're getting the income that's needed. In terms of the London Assembly, we've supported the box shifting campaign by making sure that we've passed motions in relation to that. But also, they're likely to see changes around empty property relief, whether it's the Welsh model, the Scottish model, or if you look at council tax, for example, you've got a very simple model there. So empty properties, from a council tax point of view, actually you then start doubling. There's 100% payment, then 200% payment, and it continuously increases the longer you've been in there. So there's potential there for that, effectively, that model to be copied and replicated from a business rate point of view. There could be potentially higher penalties for those who obviously cheat the system, and of course potential exemptions. I guess if there is genuine hardship, going back to that point about protecting high streets. Clearly, there are certain high streets in the country which are just struggling because of the cost of living crisis in terms of bringing businesses in. So there will be some protection there around some of those small business rates relief that are worried about, if they do expand and what have you. So those genuine exemptions and protecting those going forward. The key thing is about making sure, as I'm sure you'll all agree, really about having a fairer system of business rates. One of the key things, not just on this, but on so many other things, was that when I was knocking on doors and talking to business people and all the rest of it, is that, not necessarily a party political point, but after 14 years, and particularly the last few years of a government which was just effectively sort of inactive, was at best putting a sticking plaster on the issues that were there, at worst just leaving them to fester and get worse. There are lots and lots of issues that the new government needs to change. That was the platform it stood on, to make those changes, and we are going to see those changes come about. So that change is the only certainty. The clarity is that we want to move to a fairer system. Now, fair might mean different things to different people in the room, but I think it's already been set out in the consultation as to what some of that direction is going to look like, and it's pretty clear that we need to move at pace to revitalise those high streets, because we need to be able to do that. So I'll leave it as that and open it up to questions. Yeah.